This, oh, and we've got recording. Yeah, it's so lovely. Thank you so much for taking your time out on a Tuesday night to listen to what I'm passionate about and what I do. I've got some slides as well, just to take you through my process. I've got, I think, 4 case studies of covers that I've done and the journey from start to finish. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see this? Yeah, I'm getting some nods. That's great. Okay, well, hello. It's always nice to have a nice pop of color. If everyone's got their drink, whether it's a cup of tea or a nice nightcap, you're welcome to start drinking. Love it. Yeah, so a little bit about myself. Mark has mentioned a little bit of who I am, but I was born and raised in Australia, but I've been in the UK and in London for the last 10 years. I was born to 2 South American parents. My dad is Chilean and my mum is Argentinian, and I'm an identical twin. And I love dogs. And on the right here is my beautiful dog Jojo, who's an ex-racing greyhound. So she got retired very early because she refused to race, and now she loves sleeping on our couches and our beds. So she definitely has a life, and she's not a very good studio manager, but you know, she's there for company. I love going to the gym. I love reading, which helps in this job. And I am a book cover designer and illustrator. So for many years, as Catherine had mentioned, if you were there a few minutes ago, that I had worked at Penguin Random House, specifically Transworld, and at HarperCollins UK. And in 2018, I went freelance. And since then, I've worked for most of the big publishing houses worldwide. Most of my clients are in the UK, in the US, Australia, Canada, and Europe. Yeah, and as Mark has mentioned, so at the end of last year, I got named in the Bookseller 150 most influential people in publishing, and I won the Nibby last year. I was also D&AD judge, and I was a Bookseller Rising Star in 2021. So a little bit about my work. I've worked across all the genres you could name, and I've worked with many authors, from fantasy to non-fiction to young adults to adult mass market fiction. And it's the most rewarding thing about this job is that every day is never the same. And it's a wonderful thing. I can come to my desk and know that each day is going to be different. So some of the authors that I've worked for, I recently recovered the Game of Thrones for Italy. I rejected the Erin Morgensterns. I've worked with Isabel Allende, and Lucy Diamond. I rebranded her, which is going to be one of my case studies tonight. So my process. Every cover designer has a very different process, and it's all about finding what works for you and kind of what helps you get to the end product. And for me, I have a very specific way of doing things in order to gain inspiration and to start playing with ideas before I start drawing up sketches to send to the publishers. So from step number 1, even before this step number 1 is, I would say step 0 is I read the manuscripts. 99% of the time, I, as a cover designer, like to read the manuscript only because I think that's your first muse. And I almost find it's kind of hard and almost blasphemy in a sense that you're designing for someone's work and someone's words and not go in and try and read it. So for me, my step 0 is always to read the manuscript if the publisher provides it, and if it's been delivered before I start. And then from there, I start with a blank canvas. I think for me, the priority in book cover design is finding that beautiful harmony between the title and the author name and the imagery. And you need to find that kind of harmonious balance between all of those elements, because at the end of the day, the title needs to speak out to the audience and everything else works around that. So for that to happen, what I usually do is I get my blank canvas on Photoshop and I start putting the title and the author name in whatever font, but so that I can know and see how it will look on the page. Now, this is particularly handy when I've got very long titles. So, for example, I had to work on a title in HarperCollins, which was called Hannah Green and Her Unfeasibly Mundane Existence, which is a very long title, but it was a very playful book. And so putting it onto the blank canvas made me realize, okay, this is how much is going to take up in space, and how can I play with that in order for the title to speak out, but also the imagery to play amongst the title. So yes, that's what I usually do, as I just usually prioritize the title and the author name. Secondly, after I've done that, I then start to research. So, you know, in the midst of reading the manuscript, I start looking up inspiration online. Pinterest is always my best friend. For example, for one of the books I did called Ariadne, I spent the day at the British Museum in the Greek section, only because for me, I always want to draw inspiration, majority not from other book covers. For me, I'm a believer in doing that makes your book covers look different from everything that's already out there. So I tend to try and gain inspiration from everywhere. Sometimes if a manuscript reminds me of a movie or certain movies, I'll go and watch the films. You know, it's a hard job to do, but you know, I do it. And as well as I go and research the market of the book, the genre, what's selling at the moment, so I can understand what the trends are. I think trends are really important to understand, because in publishing, trends change over the years. And, you know, for example, nature books went from photographic in the last 10 years to purely illustrative covers. And I think it's a beautiful kind of shift in trends, but it's always good to kind of keep at the forefront of that. And, you know, reading the bookseller is really helpful as well, to kind of see what is selling. And I also try and read mainly the bestsellers as well, to understand why they're selling as well. After I've done all of that research and I start creating mood boards for inspiration, I then start playing around, whether that's, you know, sketching things up. I do little doodles on my my journal, which only I can read, because some people want to see them and then have absolutely no idea what I've drawn, because it's a really quick sketch. But then, you know, I start chopping and cropping in Photoshop until I kind of get what I have in my mind onto the canvas. This can take anywhere between a week to 2 weeks, and sometimes if it's a project that has a lot of push behind it with the publisher, I tend to take a lot more time researching and finding inspiration as well. But it also depends on kind of how creative I'm feeling, the inspiration hitting. I guess that's a hard thing about the creative industry and the having a creative job, is that you can't always expect to get that creative spirit out. So when something's not working, I just leave it for a day and just walk away from it, just to gain a fresh perspective. And then afterwards, I just take time to finesse it. Normally my first round concepts are usually sketches if I'm illustrating them. And then once the sketch has been chosen, I tend to finesse it over time, which I will show you in these case studies. So my first case study, this is a young adult book that I've designed for. It's not out yet, but the cover has been revealed. It's being published by Chicken House Books. And this was a beautiful manuscript. It was super fun, super quirky. And the genre in the market on the brief was saying that, you know, this is primarily for young adults. They wanted to get across that it was a post-apocalyptic, that it was also a rom-com. So whilst reading the manuscripts, movies such as like Warm Bodies or Love and Monsters, those were the kind of films that I went to for inspiration. I also looked at some anime art, some post-apocalyptic art, some gaming art, and, you know, Pinterest is always your best friend, finding a lot of these artworks for inspiration. So this was my mood board that I collected over time while I was doing some research. I think because this book was so colorful and so fun that I wanted to make sure that that was translated into the cover. And again, the title was very long. Apocalypse is a very long word. So I needed to find ways in order for that long word to work with all the other words on the cover. So what I normally do is I tend to provide anywhere between 4 to 8 covers, first round concept sketches for the publisher to choose from. They're usually very rough, as you can see here. And if it's handwritten, I even do that quite rough, just so that the publisher can understand my vision for these covers. The great thing for me, some designers go fully to straight to final illustration for the first round concepts, but in terms of time saving, I always think that black and white sketches is always very helpful. And I always try and give a good variety for the covers that I do provide, so that there is enough range for people to choose from. But I never provide more than 8, because then I think when it's in-house, it can get a little overwhelming to choose from. So I tend to try and narrow that down. So what the process normally is, whether, you know, you've worked in-house or not, is that these first rounds then get taken to the cover meeting, where the team of the execs and the art director sit down and kind of decide which direction they want to take. Sometimes it's very straightforward, sometimes it's not. So for this cover, it was very straightforward. Obviously this one was chosen, and they were happy for me to take it straight to final illustration. They did ask kind of what color palette I was thinking, and so eventually I provided the color palette of where I wanted to take this book cover. Again, Pinterest is very helpful in order to kind of create color palettes for you. My natural style has always been black and white drawings, and this has always helped throughout my career, is looking up color palettes to draw inspiration from. So yeah, I think as you can see that from this cover to the final, you can tell that the handwritten type has been elevated and finessed, and all the colors kind of brought together. I did end up adding a love heart in between the two protagonists, only because I felt like that there was a bit of dead space in between them, and luckily that was a very well received addition on my final illustration. So yeah, that is usually kind of the process I usually take when I'm illustrating a cover as well as designing a cover. I tend to, as I said, provide these first round concept sketches, and then from there I tend to finesse. Usually, as I said before, this one was quite straightforward. Sometimes it's all of a matter of the cover meeting going, I like the typeface on this one, but I like the elements on this one, or I like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you kind of end up putting it together. Or they'll be like, I love this cover, but can we change the typeface, or can we change this element? So it's usually depending on kind of the cover and the first round concepts, it can go from 8 tweaks to 0 tweaks and straight to final illustration. So another side of my job, which I quite love, is working with illustrators. So for this title, And this author, so Jay Kristoff, he's had a previous series in which I worked with an illustrator for his previous series, and we wanted to continue that into his new series. So we wanted to use the same illustrator. My job as the designer was also to art direct this project, so to create concepts and directions for this new series, for then being able to brief the illustrator in order to create what my vision was for this book. The genre for this book was the adult fantasy market. It was vampires, and they had underlined stay away from anything Twilight. We wanted to kind of elevate this from being a kind of a more cult classic vampire book rather than a heartthrob teen. And if you read the manuscript, it's definitely not anything to do with Twilight. We wanted to also make it come across as gothic and dark, which I think the illustrator's strengths lie in his style. And the inspirations for this book, after reading the manuscript, I went back to kind of cult classics like Interview with a Vampire, even Sleepy Hollow, which is not a vampire book, but it felt like it was the right mood. And then I also looked at concept art, which I think is always very fascinating, as well as gaming art. I think both of those areas I tend to draw a lot of inspiration from, because I think it's quite fascinating what they do, and in those areas. So my job was to first contact the illustrator. This is Kirby Rosanis. He is an incredibly talented illustrator. The intricacies of his work is close to no other. I'm obsessed with his work, and I think he's incredibly talented. So my role was to create concepts in order for the team at HarperCollins to approve, and then go from there in order to brief Kirby in terms of what direction we wanted. So, and this is where the chopping and everything and the playing for me comes to life. So all I did was draw bits of Kirby's illustrations, bits from the internet, and just roughly photoshopped and very roughly photoshopped the idea that I had in my head for this series. And this was one of the images that I sent to HarperCollins to also note where my inspiration came from, the inspiration that I got from Kirby's work, and the idea of how this motive would work throughout the whole series. So my idea was to have this circular motif in the background, and then collate elements from the book, because the book is so has such a wealth of elements to draw from. So I wanted to create this almost composite cover of just all the elements. As you can see also in Kirby's work, he's done a lot of that. So I then sent Kirby a mood board for him to kind of get a feel of the book. I also sent him a couple of excerpts that I highlighted whilst reading it that I thought would be very good for him to get inspired from, because this book is quite dark, and it has a lot of religious motives as well, angelic but quite gothic. So looking at pre-Raphaelite art, I have definitely a massive background in fine arts, which plays a massive role in how I do my research and draw my inspiration. So I found that these images would really work, as well as the is it St. Michael's? I don't know what it's called, but the one in France that's on top of the hill. So that was a massive inspiration for one of the buildings, one of the schools in the book. So I sent that across, as well as a list of imagery. When I read manuscripts, I tend to either keep my phone handy or a highlighter handy, so I can collate elements from the manuscript that would be important for the cover or could play a role in the cover. I do this as well for myself when I do when I illustrate and I'm reading the manuscripts, because I think then having a list of these things is really helpful when I start illustrating the covers. So yes, and luckily Jay, the author, was really helpful in also providing some extra imagery that he thought was really important to the story. So all of those things I sent to Kirby, and then Kirby sent me first round illustrations. So this is what he came up with. This is his rough sketch. Again, it's a rough sketch, but it's enough for the team to be able to decipher what the idea is behind it. So we had a discussion with the HarperCollins team, and we had decided that it was a very strong cover, but we wanted to get rid of the central figure. The great thing about my job is that it's always a collaborative effort. It's never just my ideas. It's multiple people's ideas pushing this work into its own space. And the author had a great idea, was to centralize the title in order for the title to be the main focal point. So we kind of hashed out ideas, and we thought, because the vampires in this book all come from different bloodlines and family lines, they all have their own crests. So we thought we'd bring a shield into the cover. So this was the next development, in which we kept all the elements apart from the central one and just made the shields the central element. What I did send to Kirby previously was the title and what kind of shield would work best for the title. Again, you know, you always have to take into consideration the importance of the title and the length and how it will sit in the cover. After he sent these sketches, we decided that the edges of the shield was a little too much in amongst all the other figures, so we wanted to just simplify it. And maybe he did also provide a shaded texture, but we thought that was deterring from the title, so we wanted something kind of in between. So this was using his final illustration. As I said, you know, sometimes the publishers always want to see multiple versions of colors so that they can choose from. So the first cover was, my initial idea was to have this black and white and gold, but then I created a few multiple options, and what the team ended up liking was the black option, which I was very much a fan of after playing around with it. But going back to these, the first cover actually surprisingly is now being used for the paperback. So the black one was for the hardback, and the first image is now used for the paperback, which only just recently came out. Yeah, so this was the final cover, and I quite liked it. What we ended up doing as well was the circular motif becoming an even bigger piece in the background. So yeah, I was very happy with how we ended up getting to this cover. So for the next one, Ariadne. This one took a bit longer, mainly because this is a perfect example of my first round concepts not actually being used, but one of them being used as the runner to where we got to the final illustration and cover. Again, as I had mentioned, for this cover, I spent a day at the British Museum looking at all the Greek art. I find that, you know, if you're doing something like Greek mythology, you might as well go straight to the source. And it's always nice to get away from my desk. As a freelancer, you tend to not really talk to anyone, which is also another reason why I got a dog, so I could actually chat to someone. And then yeah, so I ended up just spending a day at the British Museum. Again, I looked at Greek art online, as well as Pinterest. Pinterest will forever be there as a part of my inspiration. And yeah, so the brief had mentioned that they wanted it to be a mass market book, but to make sure that the audience knew that this was a Greek mythology retelling. And I think because this book was coming out straight after the likes of Circe, which was doing really well, they wanted something that was innately beautiful, but something very different to what Circe was already doing. So the brief, if just to give you an example of how a brief looks like, the ones I've highlighted was something where I can draw from. So they wanted the book to show that this was for classics and Greek mythology lovers. If you like Circe, if you're a reading group historical fiction lover, like for the Bindings and Familiars, and if you love epic immersive fiction which transports you to another world. Again, they also said that they wanted this book to be a beautiful and ornate book for people that wanted to buy the hardback so that it would become a collectible, as well as they wanted it to be shortlisted for Beautiful Book of the Year award, which now no longer exists, trying to get them to bring it back. I loved this manuscript so much, and I think it was such a beautiful thing. The brief, all briefs always give you options of possible imagery. Well, a good brief does. And basically, ironically, I didn't end up using majority of what they had proposed, and that's the joy of reading the manuscript, is that I kind of used my own imagery that I had drawn from the book. So first round concepts. This one I took to final illustration first off because I felt like my illustrations, my roughs weren't going to do it justice. So I provided 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, which was the maximum of what I normally do. And basically what we did was, once it came to the cover meeting, this one was the most liked, but they wanted to work on it. They liked the colors, they liked the snake, they liked the girl, but they wanted to kind of make it a bit more beautiful and a bit more ornate. So what we ended up doing was going back and forth, creating iterations and resketching until we found what was working. So this was the beginning. We ended up going to here, which again, they were just thinking that the snake was taking too much hierarchy in the cover. So they wanted to minimize the hierarchy of the snake and maximize the foliage. So then we went to here, which is almost at the end, but this is where it started getting tricky and a bit tweaking, a bit more tweaking. So it went from this to this, and it's just finding and spotting what we had to do to change, to changing the foliage, and kind of getting rid of the quote to see how it would sit without the quote, adding an extra leaf in the dead space, then moving things again until we got to the final cover. So this is a pure example of, sometimes the first round concepts are not going to be fully approved and there's a journey to get there. But without the senior designer that I was working alongside and her thoughts, I don't think we would have ever gone to this cover. And I think that's the beautiful thing about book covers being a collaborative effort. And I think all of her insights was super helpful in order to get to where we are. And I think, again, also that's a beautiful thing for me as a freelancer, is that I get to learn and collaborate with multiple art directors, designers, editors, and it really helps me grow as a designer to get those multiple perspectives. So yeah, it's a joyful job in order to just be able to work alongside such incredible human beings. Okay, my final case study, Lucy Diamond. Sorry, I'm going to drink a cup of tea, so that's your cue as well. Lucy Diamond, Quercus came to me saying that they wanted to rebrand Lucy Diamond and bring her into a fresher space. So for this brief, it wasn't just for the book cover, but it was also a rebranding brief. So I went in and knowing that I'd have to potentially give her a fresh new look, as well as a fresh new brand look, which usually means kind of how how her name sits for the next future books, and how the style of the books look as well. So for this, I ended up doing a lot of research on looking at books in this space, what kind of typography they use, what kind of imagery they use, what's selling, what's being coveted online in Instagram, on TikTok. So it's sometimes people go, we want something to have a big book look, which means nothing to me, because I think a big book look is it's always a perfect storm. And for people that say they want a big book, they kind of want to mean that they want it to be a bestseller, but they also want a cover to do really well and have that perfect harmony between the two. But you can't always predict that. I think word of mouth always plays a massive role in how a book sells. And I think having a beautiful cover also plays a massive part on people picking it up, as well as I know I get a lot of messages on Instagram saying that if I just say that I'm designing something, people automatically pre-order things, which I think is very kind. So it's always nice to kind of just make sure that you're designing something that people want to keep, as well as enjoy. So yes, so I did a lot of research on typography. I looked at contemporary illustrators and kind of what they were doing in different spaces. Pinterest, again, best friend. And they wanted this to sit again in the mass market, in the romantic comedy section, in the uplifting section, but also for it to work well in supermarkets. You know, there's one thing selling to Waterstones, which they do love, a beautiful book, but there's also one thing and also selling to supermarkets in which you want it to also be led by its genre. So for example, if you're designing a crime book, you want to make sure if it's selling in supermarkets primarily that it does look like a crime book, and that it has hints of other crime books that are doing really well. So it's usually genre led, in a sense that if you love this, you will love this at first glance. So it's a fine line, and I think that's such a great challenge for commercial designers to have those limitations and work with those limitations in order to create fresh covers, as well as, but also shouting to its audience. So I went through a round for my first round concepts, was hand-drawn fonts for her branding. I think the interesting thing for this is that they did eventually want to see them in situ, so that it would be better received in order to see it as a cover and the branding on the cover. So I ended up doing my first round concepts. So this one again was just playing on different elements from the book. You know, it's set in New York, but it's also kind of an uplifting story. So I wanted to play around with mainly elements, but I did introduce one human element, which I think wasn't right for this book, but I wanted to throw it in just in case. And what they loved about this one was the window, and they loved that you almost got another world that you're looking into. So we kind of discussed with the editor and the art director, and they wanted to see this version, but they also wanted to potentially see a door as well, because of this kind of leaving the house effect that happens in the book. So I created these two options, which eventually they did love the door so much that we ended up going with that. But as you can tell, that the door didn't exist in the first round concepts. Again, beautiful collaboration and understanding people, and also getting the author involved as well to see her thoughts on the cover. So this cover was chosen. It went to the author, but then the author was like, the main character doesn't usually have a backpack, so they usually have a bigger bag. So I ended up sketching again and bringing the bigger bag into it and having a little hint of the passports, which plays a massive role in the book as well. And so this was the branding we stuck with. but they wanted to see potentially non-handwritten versions of her branding, which was a great way to show the team that that the handwritten font, well, the handwritten text was actually the way to go, because I felt like just having a font felt really static. And I think that's the beauty and the importance of understanding your typography as a cover designer, is that you can do beautiful illustrations, but if you don't understand that dynamic between choosing the right fonts, it can really play a massive role in hindering the cover. So yes, I was very happy that they ended up going with this one. So it's kind of a combination of what I had provided first, but with less of a few swishes on the handwritten type. So then they wanted to see color options like they usually do. So I provided a handful of color options. I really like that whole salmon color, so I provided 2 variations of that. And luckily they did end up loving that one as well, so they chose this one. I always like putting also fake source quotes, or sometimes a fake shout line, just so they can see how that will sit on the cover. Usually it's like fantastic source, or put a great shout line here. It's not very inventive, but hey. And this was the final cover that they went for. Yeah, so I think it's a beautiful thing for as a cover designer, as I said, is such a wonderful thing, being able to work across lots of genres, lots of different projects, and being able to also work with illustrators, which is always quite a fun break in illustrating things myself as well. For me, my important thing as a freelancer is to be online. I think without my online presence, I wouldn't have gone the amount of work over the years as I have had. And I'm not naturally a fan of social media, but I've put a lot of effort into my social media, my work ones. My personal ones usually lay dormant until I start traveling, but it's proved to be an effective tool when it comes to selling myself as a brand. So, you know, having a Twitter, I'm not a wordy person, but I know that my authors are. So for me, it's important to just be on Twitter to have that conversation. And I've built very great friendships with authors that I never have contact with when I'm designing their covers, through Twitter and through Instagram. Also having my website up there is super helpful for people to go and view my work in more detail. And Instagram, I think for me, is the easiest because it's the imagery social media, so it's easier to just post things up on there. I have ventured into the TikTok world, but as a millennial and not a Gen Zer, I'm still figuring it out. And it's a very terrifying space, but we'll get there in the end. And yeah, thank you. I have time. Hopefully you guys have questions, and I'd love to kind of answer anything that you might be pressing. And I know that there are some on the chat, so I don't know, Mark, should I just open for questions first? And if people want to repeat their questions they've written on chat?
Well, maybe we go through it in order, or it could be a free-for-all.
Yeah.
But I've got one. What would you say is your best inspiration when you're designing a cover?
Definitely the manuscript. As I say, the manuscript's always my muse. And as well as you could tell in all of my case studies, I go on Pinterest a lot. I think it's a wormhole of imagery that you can work with. Maybe I spend a bit too much time on there sometimes, but it's really helpful. It's a really helpful tool for me.
It gives you the guidance, because yeah, I'm in a similar way. I'm looking for illustrators for children's books at the moment. So
yeah, that's a really great place to start for illustrators as well. I found a lot of brilliant illustrators through Pinterest. But I think for me also understanding kind of illustration agencies and seeing who they represent, and especially the London-based ones, is always a great way to kind of either gain inspiration or find illustrators that I want to use. So yeah, the binding.
Right, that's good. And my hairy friend is trying to join in the background. So
My one's sleeping somewhere and could not be bothered about what I'm doing.
so Annette had a question.
Annette.
Oh, hi, we're asking our own questions. Hi, Micaela. I've got two questions, actually. You said earlier that you start working in Photoshop and you just add layers and blah, blah, blah. I was surprised that you use Photoshop instead of Illustrator, or do you use them both?
No, I only use Photoshop. I rarely use Illustrator, only because I feel like so when I illustrate on my iPad on an app called Procreate, which then you can import into Photoshop. I find that because Illustrator works with vectors, there's less you can do with that in terms of textures and photoshopping things and manipulating things that Photoshop can provide. So I would say only 10% of my job I'm on Illustrator, but for the rest it's Photoshop.
Okay, and my next question is, I know a job often dictates which typeface you're going to use, like it should be a script or a stencil or the serif or whatever. But do you have a favourite style of type or a particular favourite typeface that you like?
I do have favourite typefaces, but I tend to try and not rely on them. What I do is that I have a spreadsheet online that is just fonts, so like serif fonts, sans serif fonts, great fonts for fantasy, great retro fonts, and whenever I find a new one I add it to that list, so then I have a list to play with. Otherwise I would be going to fonts like Orpheus, Adobe Garamond a bit too much, which I still do, but I always like to kind of advance my fonts and the usage of fonts. I also, at the beginning of every year, look at font trends for 2023. Not everyone does it, it's a very nerdy thing, but I think I always like to know what's the fresh thing that's coming up for the year for fonts, so that I can translate that into cover design as well.
Great, thank you.
So welcome.
And Chris, you had a question.
All right. Funnily enough, I kind of came across your website a few weeks ago, even before this, was announced. So I thought that was spooky, and I thought, well, I'll definitely add you to the list of potential people that I would contact. But it seems, is it true that you only work with majors, and you must be booked up months and months in advance?
I am booked until June currently. I do work with indie authors, but only a handful. For me, I never want to not give people the opportunity to work with me. Obviously publishers do pay very well, but I never want to kind of just live off that. So for example, I just did a recent a self-published author contacted me saying that they were last minute about to publish and weren't very keen on their cover. And I think for me, for the handful of clients that I do take on, if it's a brief that I really feel passionate about, or feel like I could really, I would be a really good designer for that, I do then take them on. But then again, I always have to kind of balance everything. I am also turning away big publishers because of my scheduling. So it's always, it's a fine line, and it's part of the job that I really struggle with, because I hate to say no to people. But due to not wanting to burn out, I always have to kind of make curation decisions about the work that I do take on. But in saying that, I do take on indie publishers, self-published authors, because I never want to only be a publisher designer.
But in that case, you have to kind of fall in love with the, because you wouldn't read the manuscript off a pitch. You'd have to fall in love with the pitch and whatever before you then move on to reading it. Yeah.
So now the downside is now I'm also asking big publishers to send me briefs before I slot in, because before I used to just get people, can you pencil me in? I'll send you the brief once we start. And now, because also I think for me, I always want to do covers justice and make sure that the covers are the best that they can be. So currently I'm turning away a lot of Greek mythology because I want to make sure that my brain stays fresh on that. And if I'm doing 10 Greek mythology covers, I feel like I can't do them enough justice because I've done them quite a lot recently. So I always make sure I have to look at kind of my schedules. So if a big publisher is sending me a historical fiction, which is very similar to one I'm already working on, I sadly have to decline that cover. But I feel very blessed in order to be in that position. And I know that I might not always be in that position, but I feel very blessed in being able to do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
And then next on the list is Tatiana.
Yes, hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, hello. I'm watching from Boston in the US. So that's why my accent is different from everyone. But I'm a new designer and I graduated. I didn't get a design degree, but I just started a job designing for a children's publisher here in Boston.
Amazing.
But my dream has always been to do book covers. And so I was wondering how you got your first few jobs designing covers before anyone really knew you for your work, and any recommendations you have for someone who's starting out, who wants to get into that and get their first book cover assignment, but hasn't really done that yet.
I mean, you already got that first step. The fact that you're working for a publisher already is getting your foot through the door. Sadly, I have no advice in getting into that because I fell into it. Kath, please don't tell Claire this, but basically, when I first moved to the UK, I didn't have a publishing degree either. I graduated with a Bachelor of Digital Media. So my degree was everything between graphic design, film, 3D animation, illustration. So just a combination of all of that. So when I moved to the UK, I applied to about 200 jobs. And one of the first interviews I got was at Transworld. But when they gave me a call to come in, I had applied to so many jobs, I kind of forgot which job it was. So I was like, okay, I'm going to show up and just wing it. And then, when I was at reception, there was books everywhere and they said publishers. I was like, okay, so this is a publishing design job. Okay. But before then, no one ever told me that I could design book covers for a living. So I would consider that luck and such a beautiful thing because I could not picture myself doing anything else. In terms of kind of moving about, I would what I normally do is I still do this as a freelancer, not that I want to get a publishing job in-house, but I keep alerts on the job searches to just tell me kind of what's happening, because in publishing there's always a shift. If someone leaves a design job, there's always a shift. Then that, someone from a different company takes that job and then that company's position is vacant and kind of people move around. But definitely stay in-house. There's a wealth of knowledge that you learn when you're working in-house that you wouldn't get going freelance straight away. And I never take for granted all the information that I learned over my years in Penguin and in HarperCollins. And I think also you build up contacts in that. For your portfolio, what I encourage people to do if they're not currently got a job as a junior, to start doing your own personal projects. So your favorite books that you love to read, you've already read them, redesign them in your own time and start adding those to your portfolio. Because I think especially, if you're, for people that are straight from uni, a lot of people go into applying to jobs with just their uni portfolio, and that's going to be like everyone else's. So if you start doing things on the side for your own personal projects and then start adding them in, one, you start kind of working that muscle and you get practice, but two, your portfolio starts looking a lot different from everyone else. So yeah, I mean, like, any advice you want, do send me an email. I'm always open to answering people's emails about how to kind of make the most of getting into the industry. But yes, as I said, also be online for other people to see what you're doing as well, because that can take you a long way.
Thank you.
So welcome.
Thank you. And then Lucy Upton.
Hi. I just had a quick question about how you find sort of balancing what you think is right for the cover design with what the publisher thinks is right, and whether you've ever been in a situation where you absolutely do not agree, or I feel like a lot of the time there's, you know, a lot of voices, and sometimes I really want to be like, yes, I'll do that, and I'll do that, and I'll do that, and then yeah, how do you balance that?
Well, firstly, I have a little handwritten thing on my computer screen saying pick your battles, because there is a lot of times where I will disagree with the decision that they've made, but at the end of the day, it's just choosing the right battle. And if it's a cover that I'm really passionate about seeing on the book, I do then start trying to professionally push for that cover in a very diplomatic way. When I'm creating first round concepts, sometimes I see briefs that I really disagree with, especially, again, reading the manuscript really helps, because I could then read the manuscript and be like, actually, that brief has nothing to do with where this book should be sitting. So I always, and that's the great thing about doing multiple covers, is that I create a few, if one or two, that are my wild cards that I believe are right for the cover, and then a few others that the brief has been asking. And then I would say majority of the time they go for the wild card ones, which is great, but sometimes they don't, and you kind of just have to accept it. But you know, there are certain times where I do try and battle for the right cover that I believe would work. But yeah, it's a fine line, and you know, you always have to go in. I think, again, as I said, some briefs are never very strong, so I think you know, there are some briefs that are very detailed and amazing, and then there's some that are very vague, so you kind of just have to go with your gut feeling. And I think, you know, as a creative, you kind of just have to instinctually go with that feeling of what you've read from the book and where you think it should be sitting, but also taking into consideration what the publisher has provided.
That's great, thank you.
That's my diplomatic answer.
And Kath. You're muted.
Hi, Micaela. Hi again. Well, I know you've worked with so many different kinds of authors, and I'm sure some have been very, very difficult. And because I guess some want final approval regardless of what an editorial director says, perhaps.
Yeah.
But are there some authors which one really is the most that you've got really excited about working with, or like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm working with this author. I've wanted to work with this author for so long. Has there been any particular ones that have got you really excited?
I think, well, I definitely got excited being able to recover the Game of Thrones covers for Italy.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, that is an incredible opportunity to have, even if it's, you know, for Italy. Like for me, it was such a great brief to be able to get, and I felt honored to be able to be thought that I could do that justice.
Yeah, wow.
So that's fantastic. I think for me, usually I get excited getting to know the author, and when they get really excited about what I do. The book I recently did for Patterson Joseph, the Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho, he is the nicest guy ever, and he's so supportive. Again, Jennifer Saint, you know, when I first started on Ariadne, she was a debut author. Oh, there we go, we've got it. We've got it covered.
Brilliant.
You know, Jenny is one of the nicest people ever. So, you know, and then sometimes I get authors that I get excited to work with, and they don't ever mention me at all when they promote their book. And, you know, that's really kind of, you know, I get kind of sad when you know, when they don't even tag me in it for the first time. I don't mind, you know, it's their book at the end of the day, but you know, I think the authors that I get really excited about, the ones that are really kind, very vocal, and very thankful for what I've provided for their book covers. So yeah, it's, and again with some self-published authors, some of them have been some of the kindest authors I've ever met. So yeah, it's,
yeah, no, that's good. I guess some of the debut authors end up, you know, it's lovely that you're working with some of them at the very beginning of their careers, and they'll be like so incredibly famous, you know, 10 novels down the road. It's fantastic. What a great fulfilling job, Micaela.
100%. I wouldn't do it, and I don't work a day in my life if I enjoy my job, so, which I thoroughly do.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, no worries.
And Tatiana, you had another question, I think.
Yes, just one more. I was wondering, because you're sort of taking on all these projects like on your own basis and on your schedule. I'm wondering, as a freelancer, how many book covers, like as you're waiting for different rounds, you're making progress on different covers, how many you work on in a week? It might be hard to say, but
no, it's funny because I never really, I have my schedule, which is all color coordinated and everything, so I can keep track of everything and what rounds they're on, and what kind of, obviously first round concepts can take most of my energy. So I only tend to book one first round concept per week. I tell people sometimes that's even a little insane. Per week, I don't know, because it depends on how long people take to get back to me, but I had an intern work with me last week, and she asked the same question, how many I'm currently working on, and I've got 80 titles that are live at the moment, but that's not saying, sometimes it sounds a lot more than what it is. Sometimes I'm waiting a couple months for people to feed back to me, so it's always yeah, it's the first round concepts that I usually have to put a lot more effort into, but sometimes it's like a coffee line, everyone wants coffee at the same time, and some weeks I spend Monday to Thursday just tweaking, because everyone sent me tweaking emails, and then on Friday that's when I start my first round concept for that week. But you know, every week is different, but yes, currently around 80 titles are about live.
wow.
Sounds very impressive. And John, you had a question.
Myself. My question is, as somebody that was involved in the manufacturing of covers and jackets for many, many publishers, when you're designing, do you have to work within a budget, or are you allowed completely free range? I mean, on one cover I recall we had foil blocking, embossing, spot UV, and the next cover for the same publisher, funny enough that I had a long discussion with the art director, was just purely black and white, because I said to him one day, I said, you know, your covers are getting more and more complicated. Why don't we just have something as simple as black and white? And 6 months later, we had a very straightforward black and white cover came through. So that
yeah, no, look, I always get told whether I will get finishes or not, but if you give me permission to have a finish, especially gold foil, I'm going to utilize
you're
that.
there.
And
Yeah.
I just posted on Instagram today a book that's coming out called Lies We Sing to the Sea. And, you know, if I haven't used up most of the factory's gold foil on that cover, then I don't know what's happening. But yeah, no, I get very excited when people say I do have budget for a finish. But most of the time I try and design without that in mind, if they haven't told me that, and then add that on later. But if it's an event publication, for example, Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho, that was going to be an event publication, so I knew that there would be budget for some finishes. Same with Ariadne as well. And the beautiful thing about Jennifer Saint ones is that they had budget for end papers as well, so I get to design those as well.
As well, crikey.
Yeah.
Big budget, that one.
Big budget, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes Matt Lamb is all I've got. But it's being able to work for that as well.
Okay. Sorry, I have another question as well. At what stage do you decide the size of the typeface for the author or the title? At what point does one overtake the other?
Oh, that's a very good question. It all depends, really. Obviously, if you're going to get like a George R.R. Martin, his name overtakes the title 100% of the time. For someone like Jennifer Saint, I think the beauty is that she's becoming so well known now that also her covers are becoming kind of well known hand in hand with her. So we kind of play with that. I'm slowly making her name slightly bigger every time, but it's still it's also making sure that there is a style happening as well. But usually I just wait for the publisher to go, no, the hierarchy needs to be the author name first and then the title.
Right.
But usually I try and make sure that both are legible enough. But with the debut author, it's always the case of making sure that the title is bigger than the author name.
But ultimately you get into a style for a particular author.
Exactly. And like, for example, the Lucy Diamond, the style and the branding that I've just created for her is going to be consistent over the next future covers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Annette, you got another question?
Yeah, sorry, I've had more than my fair share. Micaela, you said that you work for publishers in like USA, Canada, Australia, Europe, etc. What are the rates of pay like compared to what we get paid in the UK?
The US are very generous. Yeah, no, it's funny. When I went freelance, it was interesting to start understanding the rates and what was fair in every country, because it changes. Obviously the States, I think, have bigger budgets, and Tatiana, you'll love to know this. Yeah, no, the US are very their budgets are almost double what the UK usually provide. I think, dare I say it, the UK hasn't risen with inflation as much since I've started. When we freelance things out, is only a couple £100, if that, more than when I started 10 years ago. So I think that there's room for a bit more for the inflation side of things. But yeah, I think now, because of now that I've had a bit more experience as a freelancer, I have learned to be able to push it a little bit more. But yeah, it's different. And again, Australia is different, Canada is different. I would say Canada sits in between the US and the UK, and Australia would slightly be under the UK in terms of pricing. So yeah, it's taken me a while to gauge what's fair, but I think I've gotten there.
Great, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Sorry, I think on that point,
Yeah,
some of the it's all relative to the publisher's final print ones, isn't it?
yes, again, yeah, definitely.
I mean, I don't know what the statistics are this day and age, but the UK used to be something like 10% of the USA print runs. So
it's much, yeah, no, it's fascinating though, because again, if the print run is smaller, then the budget is smaller. And for Europe, again, their print run's much smaller. So I tend to gauge what their percentages of costs are. Again, if the brief is amazing, then I'm always happy to say yes to it, despite the cost. Although the downside is that there's been a couple of projects, but there's one project where I got approached by the UK to design, and they offered me a certain amount, and then a week later the US approached me, and because it was a conflict of interest, they were paying 3 times the amount the UK was, but because I already committed to the UK, I had to turn that down, which was very hard, but you know, like
Yeah.
it happens very rarely, but thus is life.
Have you done anything for Scandinavian
No, I haven't
countries?
actually.
Oh. I just wondered how their price
I would say
parameters
they're
came in.
probably roughly with Europe and their pricing.
Yeah. Thank you.
No worries. Anyone else?
I just have one very last
Yeah, no,
question.
go for it.
I was wondering, what is your favorite cover you've worked on up to now?
It's like asking what your favorite.
I know. Favorites, plural.
Favorites, yeah. I would say the binding will always stay in my heart because that really helped shape me as kind of my style. And I think for the binding I designed about 60 covers because I was so obsessed with that brief. And with that brief, Claire, my ex-boss, had opened it up to the whole team because it was an event publication, so she wanted everyone to have a shot at it. And because I so wanted to win it, because I loved the manuscript, I just kept designing. Even in my free time, I was like designing, which then eventually 4 out of the 6 covers that went to cover meeting were mine, which I was very happy about. So the binding, I've just come out with a book that's about to be published in March, which is called The Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi, which I loved doing because the author had sent me all her research in 17th century Arabic sea maps and explorations and stuff like that. And it's a fantasy book, and it's like pirates, but primarily most of the characters are from the Middle East and stuff. So I think it was such a beautiful and wonderful book to be able to design for another HarperCollins book. Lies We Sing to the Sea, the one I was just talking about, the Charles Ignatius Sands show, all the Jennifer Saints, I can name all of them. I think for me, you know, it's just a great opportunity to be able to be a part of such a journey for these authors. So yes, I could, the list could go on, but those are some of my highlights.
Awesome, thank you.
Welcome.
That's good. Anyone else have any questions? No, I think that's been fantastic. And just one bit, with you were saying you're artistic. Do you have any time to do any drawing yourself or artwork?
I don't illustrate anymore because for me that's work, but I do paint, so that's one of my paintings.
Right, okay, that's nice.
Yeah, I've started painting and I refuse to sell them because I want to keep it in a hobby space. And if someone wants it, I'm like, if I have like a painting that I want to give away, I'll give it away. No one has to pay me for it. But if I start selling it, then it becomes more of a work mentality. So I always like to keep things. I started archery last year, which again is something that's kind of a creative space for me, just to get my mind off things. Sometimes I go and do pottery. I think I'm a firm believer of doing things that you're not good at, because I think that changes your brain a little bit. And for me, that really helps. I think travel really helps me as well. So doing things that are creative that I'm not very technically good at, or haven't worked in the space of, or, you know, going away and doing a sport like archery or traveling really kind of helps reinvigorate my creative brain. So COVID was very hard for me.
You need something to sort of change your mind and refresh you as well.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's a beautiful thing, on being bad at something and then slowly kind of teaching yourself to become good at it. I think, you know, the older we get, the more we fall back on what we're good at, rather than trying things that are new. And I think after COVID, I was like, I'm going to try all the hobbies that I've always wanted to try, and then see which one. So I picked up Tai Chi, you know, I picked up archery, I picked up painting again. So it's kind of nice to be able to just get out of my work brain a little bit. But because I'm so passionate about it, I always kind of then, you know, go, oh, that's a great idea to kind of bring that in. And my sister's like, can you just stop thinking about covers? And I'm like, okay, no, I'm sorry. It's just, you know, I start then getting excited about when I step away from it. So yeah.
Well, and possibly some of the other things give you inspiration as well. So
Yeah, 100%. Traveling always gives me so much inspiration.
Sorry, could I ask a question then? How do you fit as a freelancer? And my wife used to run her own company, totally unrelated to anything related to this. But how do you find when you're traveling to keep your freelance business going? Because publishers carry on, and you're maybe out of contact, or
yeah, I think for me, I always give all my clients 1 to 2 months warning that I'm going to go away for 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
right?
Most of the time I also block in my schedule with very vibrant green, knowing that and then I always block out the week before I go on holiday and the week after for no new concepts and just tweaking, so I can kind of pump out things. But I think in publishing, things are never tomorrow kind of urgent if you're on top of things.
Maybe on your side, but on the manufacturing side, believe me.
I think
tomorrow,
vocal about
yesterday
it
was too late.
I think because the beautiful thing about cover design, we're the first point in contact, and you know, manuscripts are still being edited during that stage and everything like that. So I think for me, I mean, being in production side of things, it's you're right at the end of that process. So I have to be wise in scheduling my time, being very communicative of that I am taking holidays. Like, for example, I'm working with an illustrator who sent me something and said, by the way, tomorrow I'm off for a month. And I'm like, where was that communication? So for me, I always kind of make sure that I am very communicative in the times that I'm taking off, and then I let my out of office do the job for me.
And it just you mentioned your sister. Is she related in any way to this to publishing, or is she
soon to be, but I'm not allowed to talk about that project.
No, I just, you know.
But she runs her own creative agency, so so we're kind of on par in many ways.
Great, good.
Yeah. It's great, and she lives downstairs, so it's always nice to
come right.
So we're very lucky to live in the same apartment building.
Right, well, that's fantastic, Micaela. And as I said, you know, because you when we spoke earlier, because you addressed the Galley Club, then we offer you a free membership for a year.
Oh, that's really kind. Thank you so much.
And I'm sure Annette will speak to you, because we also give you a gift. Thank you for.
Oh, you really don't have to. The pleasure's all mine.
Well, it's only a small thing. But anyway, thank you again. It's really been good. And I did see your post earlier on about the poster at London Bridge and you standing there with a copy of the book. Yeah.
So it was nice seeing your work on a billboard. It doesn't happen very often.
But no, thank you again. It's been great. And for anyone interested, I've put details in the chat, or you can go to the Galley Club website. We've got the quiz night coming up in 7th of March, and then Sue Bradbury from sorry, Derek, what was that?
A week today, I mean a month today.
Yes, and then Sue Bradbury on the 4th of April, I believe, from the Folio Society, and then Mitali, who is the vegan publisher, in beginning of May, which I think is the 2nd of May. So thank you again, Micaela, and we look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you so much, and thank you for questions as well. Thank you,
Micaela. It's great.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.